Welcome to CSP 340, Chapter 9, Part 3, and this is the last part. Aren't you relieved? We're going to look now at environmental adaptations. For children who have the characteristics we've talked about, where they have rigidity, where they like routine, they like predictability, where they have language problems, where they have social problems. Here are some of the things we're going to do in the environment to make it more amenable to their needs. We're going to look at their preferences. What are the things that they like and the things that they're interested in? Remember, they have intense interests, and so we want to look at those and make sure we consider those as we plan. We want to have routines that are the same every single day, always and forever, because that's what kids with autism need. We're going to put visual cues up so that they can see what they need to do and when they need to do it, not just hear it. We're going to have schedules up so that they know every step of every day and every step of every procedure. We're going to reduce distractions. We're not going to have bright, colorful, lively classrooms because that overstimulates kids with autism. We're going to emphasize rewards, not punishments. We're going to use concrete language and avoid abstractions wherever possible. We're going to watch our reactions to them. So in other words, when they do things that may seem hurtful, we're going to keep in mind that they do these so-called hurtful things because they don't understand other people's viewpoints. And we're going to look at that in just a minute. And then we're going to give transition cues of how you get from one activity to another. Challenging behaviors. One of the things that we're going to use for kids with autism is what we call functional behavioral assessment and positive behavior supports. What we look at here is that if we have a child who is having the problem of refusing to follow directions, swearing and hitting, we want to go back and see what triggered it. So in this case, what triggered it for this kid was he was asked to do difficult independent seat work. Then we want to know whether there was something that happened before that, and we find that sometimes he has altercations with his peers during a class period. So what we're going to do is we're going to neutralize by allowing a break following an altercation. So if he has an altercation with somebody, then we're not going to ask him to do anything for a while until he calms down. With the triggering antecedent, what we're going to do is we're going to come up with an acceptable alternative. It's what we call a functional equivalent replacement behavior. So in this case, he can ask for a break or ask for time away after he's gotten upset about something. What we want instead of the problem behavior is we want the desired alternative. We want him to complete his work without complaints. What we find is that the reason that he is refusing to follow directions, swearing and hitting, is it allows him to avoid the task. What we want him to do is to do the task, which is up here. If he does the task, then he's going to get points, he's going to get good grades, and he's going to get the next assignment. And so we want it to be so that this typical consequence is going to be more powerful than this maintaining consequence, which is avoiding the task. Now, some things that we have that we think about when we talk about autism that we don't have good answers for. The first one is what causes autism. You know, we basically don't know. And that's what this part here says. This part says that there is no single cause for autism. We know that there are some genetic influences. We can have genetic mutations where a gene splits incorrectly or combines incorrectly, and we get some types of autism from that. We have some other genes that actually can cause a person to be sensitive to autism. We have found that parental age, extreme age, can make a difference. We have found that maternal health, maternal exposure to poisons and to pollution, extreme prematurity, extreme low birth weight are also factors. We also find that if there's oxygen deprivation in utero, that can make a difference. Prenatal vitamins have been indicated, and also a weak immune system. Another question is, why are we seeing so many new cases of autism? Well, one of the reasons is we started including Asperger's in there. And Asperger's is a milder form of autism where the child has average or even above average IQ, but then they have some of the other characteristics. Used to be that children like that were just considered weird, and they didn't get this diagnosis of autism. We have more community awareness. People know about autism. They've begun to look for it. They've begun to suspect it. Another reason we have so many new cases is because of the difference in the word incidence and prevalence. When we're talking about incidence, we're talking about new cases each year. When we're talking about prevalence, we're talking about how many cases there are right now. So if we're just talking about how many kids in Cleveland got identified last year, that would be one number. If we were talking about total number of kids with autism, that would be a different number. When you see reporting, they sometimes report one and sometimes report the other, and all they say is how many kids with autism, and so you don't know which one they're saying. Also, an issue of who reports and how. A lot of the statistics we're seeing are parents reporting. We also see medical people reporting, and we see schools reporting. And those are determined very different ways. A medical diagnosis of autism is a very different diagnosis than a school diagnosis of autism. And then just the desire to help people. So we're identifying a lot more kids as autistic because if we do, then we can get them some help. And the last is whether there's a link between vaccines and autism. This is very controversial.
Millions of kids each year get immunized to protect against disease. Diseases like smallpox and polio now affect far fewer people because of widespread vaccination. Vaccines contain inactive viruses or bacteria that stimulate your body's B and T immune cells to produce antibodies, which then fight the disease. When enough people get immunized, vaccines produce herd immunity. When someone is sick, the disease is contained by those who've had the vaccine, preventing it from spreading further and getting to those that are most vulnerable. But if only a few people are vaccinated, the disease spreads easily through the population and outbreaks can occur. In 1998, a paper in a major medical journal proposed a link between autism and the vaccination for measles, mumps, and rubella. The popular press and some celebrities fueled anxiety about vaccinations based on this report. Some vaccinations can have side effects like soreness and fever, but autism is a complex neurobehavioral disorder that occurs with a spectrum of symptoms. A rise in prevalence may have more to do with changing diagnostic standards than other factors. In fact, over a dozen studies have failed to find any connection between autism and vaccines, and that original paper was retracted amid allegations of fraud and conflicts of interest. Yet the actions of celebrities and the media can have a lasting effect. More than half of Americans still suspect there's a link between vaccines and autism. Call it a case of herd mentality. The consequences can be serious. In Ireland, vaccinations dropped about 30%, resulting in 1,500 new cases of measles and mumps, including 3 deaths. And in the U.S., states with lowered vaccination rates are currently experiencing outbreaks of measles and epidemic levels of whooping cough. So don't be immune to good advice. Better a sore bottom than a deadly bottom line.
The last video is more time than we have to see, so I'm going to play just part of it for you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Greg Poland. I'm a professor of medicine here at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I direct the Mayo Vaccine Research Group. This September, I've published a paper in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings entitled MMR Vaccine and Autism, Vaccine Nihilism, and Postmodern Science. The reason that I wrote this particular commentary was to try to address to the world, but really my colleagues, and now through this video, you, the average listener, what science is there regarding all that you hear about MMR and autism? Well, we go back well over a decade to 1998 when a physician in Britain named Dr. Andrew Wakefield published a paper in an influential journal called The Lancet where he proposed that MMR vaccine was somehow associated with and perhaps causative of autism. Independent bodies have investigated Dr. Wakefield. They have taken his medical license from him. The British Medical Council declared his work fraudulent, and yet it has caused these great public health harms across multiple nations. And we really need to address that, and we need to reassure and educate the public, our patients, other providers, and the media. As you might imagine, this generated immense debate and controversy, concern that people had. Well, if I give this vaccine to my child, are we going to cause autism, in sort of a simplistic way of stating it? Appropriately so, once that hypothesis was raised, many studies were done, all of them showing that there was no connection. Once that happened, then people said, well, maybe it's not measles vaccine, maybe it's MMR, the combination of measles, mumps, rubella. And when that was disproven, well, maybe it's thimerosal, the mercury-containing preservative that was in the vaccine. And that's been disproven. So there have been well over 20 studies done across 2 decades in multiple geographic locations and countries, all with the same conclusion. There is no scientific evidence of a connection between autism spectrum disorders and MMR vaccine. The problem is that there are many celebrities and non-scientists who continue to push this connection, and a media anxious to embrace controversial topics, probably in order to increase interest in their particular story. This has caused an additional problem. Because of this controversy, many parents in the U.S., in Western European countries, particularly England and other places, have decided not to immunize their children with MMR vaccine because of this fear of autism. So what that has engendered is a rising proportion of the population who have not immunized their children. That is, they are susceptible to this virus. And it's worth making a very important point here. Measles is the most contagious infectious disease of humans that we know of. Even with modern medical care, about 3 out of every 1,000 children who contract measles will go on to die as a result of that. Many more will be injured as a result of that. So we now have outbreaks in the U.S. and in Europe of a disease that we had previously controlled. We had eliminated measles in the United States, indigenous measles, meaning cases that arose from citizens of the U.S. We had eliminated that in the U.S., and the plan was to eradicate it, much as smallpox has been eradicated and no longer poses a threat to us. So whereas we had way less than 50 cases a year all through the 2000s, this year already, and I'm speaking in early August, this year already we've had over 150 cases in the U.S. documented, probably many cases that we have not yet documented. That's a 3-fold rise, so we're well on our way to a historic record number of measles cases in this era of containment and of elimination. So clearly, not giving the vaccine has had a devastating public health effect on individuals and on communities. How are we going to resolve the debate? And perhaps if you're a parent listening, how are you going to make a decision? And I think to try to make it simple, we have 2 choices. We can follow science and the evidence, or we can follow our emotion and what's been called postmodern science. That is a kind of relativism where anybody's viewpoint, no matter how outrageous, no matter how unscientifically based, is equally valid. So what do we need to do instead? Well, I think we need to educate the public about the method of science and how we know what we know. I think one of the most important things, and this is something that grieves me as a physician, we spend so much time and energy and limited research funds on trying to repeatedly do studies to show whether there is or is not a connection between the vaccine and autism. And as I've said, well over 20 studies have shown no connection. No study has shown a connection. that we are wasting our funds. Why not apply this money to new hypotheses about what the cause of autism is?